Try and imagine, you've done all you can in your life to provide for your family by working and studying hard to reach where you are currently. After all that, you finally achieve success and receive your happily ever after. However, what comes after that? As time progresses, you begin to display symptoms that prevent you from functioning as an adult properly. You begin to revert back to a childlike state in which you would need a caretaker to provide basic care for you. The issue arises when these caretakers are the ones that are mistreating you. Domestic violence is a concept that is not so foreign when it comes to families all around the world, and Malaysia is not an exception. Abuse can come in many forms such as physical abuse in terms of pushing, punching, kicking, or confining them to a space against their will. Another is in the form of emotional and psychological abuse and financial abuse. This is in the form of stealing or misappropriation of their assets and money, or just neglecting their basic needs by abandoning them. In Malaysia, the requirement to fall under the term elderly begins when one reaches the age of 60 and beyond. Domestic violence is a concept that is not so foreign when it comes to families all around the world, and Malaysia is no exception. Abuse can come in many forms such as physical abuse in terms of pushing, punching, kicking, or confining them to a space against their will. Another is in the form of emotional and psychological abuse and financial abuse, stealing or misappropriation of their assets and money, or just neglecting their basic needs by abandoning them. In Malaysia, the requirement to fall under the term elderly begins when you reach the age of 60 and beyond. There are no specific statutes and laws regarding the rights and protection that are specifically entitled to elderly people. This is evident as Article 8 of the Federal Constitution, which states that there will be non-discrimination for a person's race, religion, descent, gender, or place of birth. There is no mention of non-discrimination against a person's age. However, this does not mean there are no means of protection when it comes to elderly people. As per the Domestic Violence Act 1994, includes statutes that can be applied to elderly victims. The Domestic Violence Act is meant to be read together with the Malaysian Penal Code. While the former is meant to be the main legislation when it comes to protection and civil remedies for the affected victims, the latter, the Penal Code, is used to provide punishment to the offenders. Thereafter, in 2012, the Domestic Violence Act 1994 was amended to broaden the definition of incapacitated adult to include people who are only partially incapacitated as opposed to only wholly incapacitated people, and added people of old age to fall under this provision. This provision was also further broadened by including new definitions of domestic violence to include psychological abuse, which leads to the victim being conflicted with emotional trauma, using substances to willfully intoxicate the victim to manipulate their view of safety. Another amendment to the Act was also made in 2017 to include more paragraphs in Section 2 to include causing financial loss to the victim and causing distress and threatening the victim with acts of violence, which leads to the victim to fear for their safety. However, this amendment only applies to an elder adult who has been living in a house as a member of the family, in which the offender under this act must be related to the victim, whether it be through blood, marriage, or adoption. If the offender does not fall under this category, i.e. related to the victim, then the act will not be able to be used against them. This leaves a significant plot hole to be used when it comes to elderly victims to be abused, neglected, and exploited. This particular effect shows how the Domestic Violence Act 1994 is not sufficient enough for protection of the elderly, as it has its limitations. While this act tries to include a wide array of ways for an elderly person to be abused in the domestic violence context, this leaves them vulnerable when it comes outside of said context, where if they are not living under the house as a family, they can be left to be neglected, abused, and exploited. This puts into view as to what would happen when the abuse occurs in a community and care center, and it would technically not fall under this act. This also puts the definition of neglect as a form of abuse to be not considered. Another issue to consider is for the definition of financial loss to fall under the Domestic Violence Act. For an incapacitated victim to claim protection due to financial loss, there needs to be an element of distress. This issue would then arise when the victim is completely oblivious to the fact that they have been financially exploited. and hence be spared of the distress caused. This would then be a possible argument to negate the protection under the domestic context for a victim to rely on this act.
I'm Leshna and I'll be covering the latest statistics on domestic violence. According to estimates, elder people in Malaysia make about 9% of the country's 30.9 million overall population. According to the Malaysian Elder Mistreatment Project, MASTRO, which is the country's first community-based investigation into the issue of elderly domestic violence, 1 in every 20 elders in Malaysia experienced elder abuse. In the last 12 months, there has reportedly been 4.5 prevalence of overall abuse. The most frequent types of abuse were financial, physical, sexual, and psychological. It is crucial that local data be gathered to increase awareness of the issue of elder abuse in the community and persuade lawmakers that action is unquestionably required. The lack of statistics or information on elder abuse that could guide the development, particularly legislation to handle elder abuse, has been brought to light by local researchers. Our country currently has no legislation in place to stop elder abuse. Although the present Domestic Violence Act 1994 automatically covers all family members, including elder people, it is seen to be insufficient to defend and preserve the rights of the elders because it primarily intends to prevent violence against intimate partners. Even though it happens in our society, elder abuse is rarely ever reported. Due to a lack of public awareness and medical staff education, this issue frequently goes unnoticed. As a result, it is challenging to find statistics on elder abuse in Malaysia. This was noted in the 2006 National Report on Violence and Health for Malaysia, published by the World Trade Organization. However, the World Health Organization reports that 1 in 6 people aged 60 and above have recently experienced some sort of mistreatment. According to the National Health and Morbidity Survey 2018 from the Health Ministry, 1 in 11 older people were at risk of being abused by a person they trusted. According to this Health Ministry study, which polled 1,927 elder people, 70% of abuse victims had at least one non-communicable disease, NCDs. NCDs are typically difficult, and it makes caring for an older senior more challenging, which may finally result in neglect or the caregiver's incapacity to handle the situation. Moving on, we will now discuss the elder abuse under Islamic law. Abuse of the elderly is forbidden in Islam. It is obvious that the old should be respected and treated with kindness from the fundamental sources of Islamic law. Islamic law grants elders a variety of rights. Old homes are uncommon in Islamic nations due to the religious reverence that is shown to parents and the elderly in general. The responsibility of providing for one's parents during their most trying period is viewed as an honor, a blessing, and a significant chance for spiritual development. In Islam, it is not enough to simply pray for the parents. Instead, one should treat them with unending kindness, bearing in mind that it was our parents who cared for us when we were defenseless children, providing us with love and mercy. In Islam, taking care of one's parents is second to prayer as a duty, and they have a right to demand it. It is considered impolite to voice any annoyance when the elderly becomes difficult for no fault of their own. Section 60 of the Islamic Family Law Federal Creditors Act 1984 applied to all cases of elderly women who become victims of abuse by her husband, or a claim by elderly parents who become victims of physical abuse and neglect of maintenance by their children. We can see this in the case of Khalil bin Ahmad against Kamal bin Khalil 2004. The plaintiff, an elderly father, has applied to the court for the right to maintenance which had been neglected by his son since the past 10 years. The plaintiff had sought payment Rm 500 per month, arrears of maintenance Rm 36,000 for the neglect period of 10 years, and claimed Rm 2,000 for settlement of medical debt of the defendant's stepmother who was critically ill. In allowing part of the plaintiff's claim, the court ruled that provisions of money for life expenditure for parents is obligatory on the children. Taking into consideration the facts and circumstances as well as the defendant's ability and income, the court decided that the defendant should pay a sum of Rm 2,000 for medical debt and pay the balance of Rm 200 every month to the plaintiff, the father, as maintenance.
Thank you, Lesha. How you doing, Dr. Hema? I'm Salman and I'm going to discuss the challenges in respect to domestic violence of the age. The abuse of older people, also known as elderly abuse, is a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there is an expectation of trust which causes harm or distress to an older person. This type of violence constitutes a violation of human rights and includes physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional abuse, financial and material abuse, abandonment, neglect, and serious loss of dignity and respect. Abuse of older people can have serious physical and mental health issues, financial, social consequences, including, for instance, physical injuries, premature mortality, depression, cognitive decline, financial devastation, and placement in nursing homes. For older people, the consequences of abuse can be especially serious and recovery may take such a long time. Elderly abuse is a pervasive problem that affects millions of seniors every year. Unfortunately, it is vastly underreported issue and many older adults suffer in silence. But what is a common reason that victims of elderly abuse do not report it? Okay, stop around. I need to leave.
Hello, my name is Kazim and I'll be explaining on the available support mechanisms for victims of domestic abuse. Now, in Malaysia, victims of domestic violence have access to several support systems, including the first one, which will be Talian Kasih, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Talian Kasih is a national helpline available 24/7 for victims of domestic violence and other forms of abuse. It provides counseling, information, referrals to local support and services. The second one will be Women's Aid Organizations, which is WAO. WAO is a leading non-governmental organization in Malaysia that offers a range of services for women and children affected by domestic violence. They operate a helpline, provide shelter, counseling, legal assistance, and advocacy services. And now moving on to the third one, which is One Stop Crisis Center, OSCC. OSCCs are established in hospitals across Malaysia to provide immediate support and assistance to victims of domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. They offer medical care, counseling, police assistance, and referrals to other support services. And the fourth one, which is legal aid centers. The Malaysian Bar Council operates legal aid centers that provide free legal assistance to low-income individuals, including victims of domestic violence. These centers can help victims with obtaining protection orders, divorce, custody matters, and other legal issues related to domestic violence. And lastly, we have the Social Welfare Department. This department in Malaysia provides various services to support victims of domestic violence, including counseling, shelter, financial assistance, and rehabilitation programs. Victims can approach the nearest Social Welfare Department office for assistance. Now, after all of that, it is important to note that the support mechanisms may vary in different regions of Malaysia. Victims of domestic violence or their loved ones can reach out to the above organizations or contact local authorities for assistance and guidance specific to their location. With that being said, my name is Kazim and I'll be passing it on to Leshana for now. Thank you.
We will now discuss the reported cases of domestic violence. The first case is the Queen against Eamon Coyle 2010. On 4th of December 2009, the offender, who was born on 10th of October 1992, was committed to the Crown Court for trial on a single count of murdering Francis O'Neill, his grandfather, aged 78, on 11 April 2009. The second case is an article by Sinar Daily Malaysia Publications where an elderly man breaks a finger beaten by his son. In this case, a septuagenarian, who is a person between 70 to 79 years old, broke his right thumb as a result of his son hitting him with a stick in an incident in Kampung Pekalan, Sentul on a Wednesday. The 50-year-old suspect's aggressive actions also caused the 71-year-old victim to suffer an injury to the back of his head. Besut District Police Chief Superintendent Abdul Razak Muhammad said that the incident came to light after the victim went to the house of one of his children, the complainant, at about 7:30 a.m. and told him that the complainant's brother had beaten him on the head, left eye and right hand. The victim also received several stitches on the back of his head. The cause of the incident is believed to have occurred when the suspect suddenly went berserk because the victim refused to give him money and acted to injure the victim. The remand application for the suspect was made on Thursday and the case was investigated on Section 326 of the Penal Code.
The first challenge in respect of domestic violence, where it all comes down to why it is not being reported, the fear of retaliation. Retaliation is one of the most common reasons that victims of elder abuse do not report it. It's common for the abuser to be someone the victim knows, perhaps a family member or caregiver. The victim relies on their assistance, so they worry about the person retaliating. The victim might be further isolated, neglected, or even harmed. The abuser might go as far as threatening the victim. And secondly, shame. Elder abuse victims feel ashamed or embarrassed about elder abuse. Some people might feel that they brought the abuse on themselves or caused the abuser to be angry somehow. There's also a stigma around abuse. Some victims might feel speaking about the abuse make them look weak or vulnerable. Thirdly, the lack of awareness. Sometimes the older adults do not know that they are victims. They lack awareness and do not know the signs. The situation is more common with emotional or financial abuse rather than physical abuse. Someone unfamiliar with signs of abuse might mistake the event for something else, perhaps related to aging or health problem. In some situations, the inability to escape the dangerous situation leads them not to report the abuse. For example, someone lacking physical or financial means could opt to stay quiet. Another example of someone who doesn't have access to the internet or other resources where they can learn more about their rights or ask for help. This situation is especially challenging for someone living in rural or isolated area. Someone suffering from cognitive impairment can also struggle with letting someone know about them being victims of abuse. Seniors with dementia or other cognitive impairments may be unable to communicate effectively or even realize that the abuse is happening in the first place. The victim's caregiver or family members may dismiss their concerns or fail to take their complaints seriously, which may further and discourage victims from reporting their abuse. Some seniors strongly distrust authority figures or the system designed to protect them. Someone who had a negative experience with healthcare providers may fear to be treated disrespectfully or that the authorities will not take their complaints seriously. This fear can discourage them from speaking out. These aren't the only challenges the aged are facing currently. There have been instances where seniors would face emotional blackmail where they would be removed from their homes by their guardians, and as we all know, the elders will not be able to survive on their own on their outside world. As cruel as it sounds, the elderly are grown babies, and this would cause them to be fearful of reporting such an event. There will be a reason they have guardians. They are not able to look after themselves. Therefore, going out of their home to make a report would be a hassle, as there are some who are bedridden and will not be able to have access to public transportation. As we also have cases where they won't be able to remember places. For example, seniors with amnesia, and usually being old comes with a package of medical conditions. In some cases, the authorities have fixated hotlines for in reporting abuse. However, being older or being aged, the elderly have more to less access to hotlines, and they are not really tech savvy regardless of them owning a smartphone, and they will need the guidance of younger generations or their guardians to assist them in this matter. The final challenge would be the law itself. Do we have law to protect the elderly from being abused? Yes, we do, but if they can't fulfill the minimum requirement of reporting, how would the law play a role in their protection? Yeah. Now I have to say thank you to you and then move on to my part. Because, yeah, after her, it's me, then now I have to come back again. Okay. Yeah. Once again, thank you, Leshna. Again, I'm here to discuss the recommendations or solutions in tackling domestic violence against the aged. It can be stated that in Malaysia, there is a need to educate society on the issue, codify the law, and then criminalize the offenders. Malaysia ought to recognize the elder abuse as a specific crime. Prior to this, there is a need to educate and create public awareness on the matter. The recording of proper and accurate statistics would be essential for this. Shelter homes and institutions that protect the elders are being made victims of this crime must be made available. Indeed, the Department of Social Security Malaysia can play a vital role in this. As for a proper legal framework to criminalize this, which is the main focus of this question, there are several suggestions to do this. The first being the legislature to add a section about elderly abuse to the Domestic Violence Act. In addition, the Family Act can be amended by the legislature to include a provision requiring children to take care of their parents. In the event they fail to do so, they would be required to pay a fine, and the court would require them to pay a certain amount each month to support their elderly parents. This idea could include a lawful complexity, and a different implementation office may be expected to complete it. Be it as it may, this isn't difficult to do so. For example, in the Maldives, Section 57 of the Family Act mandates that children are to take care and pay for their parents' bills. The following section is cited. Each individual will altogether that he might act in a way similar with the position appointed by the religion of Islam concerning guardians, and to a degree it is monetarily feasible for him. Give their folks sufficient food, asylum, and attire, take care of their clinical necessities, meet their other essential necessities, and expect different accommodations and convenience they expect throughout everyday life. No individual will treat his folks with mercilessness or act in a way harmful to their parents based on family demonstration of all this, Section 57. The definition of terms to elderly abuse, such as adult elder or disabled adult, must also be clarified in Malaysia. There is a likewise need to embed a detailing prerequisite and exploring methods of grown-up misuse cases, like what the lawmaking body had placed in the abuse behavior at home demonstration. The establishment of an ombudsman to address issue of this kind would provide means to resolve the issue immediately without resorting to the courts. Mediation and other ADR techniques would be much more suitable for resolving issues of this kind. This is on the grounds that agreeably resolving the question would help the two players instead of battling the case like adversaries. This is the method of accomplishing harmony and congruity in the general public. Creating a comprehensive new piece of legislation to address this issue would be the most practical approach to avoid tangle maze of legal regulations. A Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act, for instance, could be enacted in Malaysia. This act includes a provision that states those who fail to care of their elderly parents or provide for their care will face up to 3 months in prison, a fine not less than 10,000 ringgit, or both. In demonstration, there's a need to characterize the importance of older folks and the kind of senior maltreatment and so forth. The strategy of housing a grumbling and the question goal system can be likewise remembered for the demonstration. Ebenezer EG 2008 likewise maintains the point of view in Malaysia that there is a need to plan a senior demonstration, defensive demonstration. Thank you, and that's all from our group.
Okay, done.